Hello everyone, welcome to yet another session of the daily news analysis by SRIRAM'S IAS, where we take up the important articles featuring in the Hindu newspaper and break them down for our understanding from the UPSC examination point of view. So let's start our today's discussion by taking the important articles which feature in the New Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper. And with this, let's take up our first article for the day. The first article which appears in the newspaper reads, "Big Tech Firms Swing the Axe on Talent." Now this particular article appears in the newspaper in the backdrop of the news which most of you must have seen as to how the newly appointed CEO of Twitter, Elon Musk, laid at least half of its employees or is in the process of laying off more employees from Twitter. So this sparked a storm where most of the employees took to the Twitter as well as other social media platforms, saying how unruly and cold the treatment of laying off was, where a simple mail was sent to them and they were laid off. So in fact, Twitter is not the only firm which is laying off its employees, and major tech firms such as Microsoft, Facebook, which is now Meta, has also indulged into these activities. So through this article, we'll try to analyze why is this mass laying off spree is happening on the account of big tech firms, what are the reasons behind this laying off, and what is the future that is beholding this sector. So with this, let's try to analyze the issue. What is happening? Many firms are laying off employees as macroeconomic headwinds and tight business budgets are making them restructure their business processes and talent needs. Now, what this complicated statement means is what we'll try to understand through a simple story. What is happening through data? Let's first understand. Twitter, as I said, through Elon Musk, is laying off close to 50% of its workforce. Recently, Meta laid off 12,000 of its employees, and this was despite when Facebook is now Meta and Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook, is wanting to expand Meta into a metaverse kind of a app. So despite these expansion plans, they laid off 12,000 employees. Similarly, even Microsoft laid off 1,000 employees last month, which was the third round of layoffs. And Apple also is freezing hiring for the next 2 quarters. And one surprising news in US is that the international chip maker Intel is also laying off employees despite the CHIPS Act. So US government brought out the CHIPS Act in order to boost the domestic growth of its semiconductor industry. This is what the chips that are manufactured by Intel. Despite the push that is given by the US government, even Intel is laying off its employees. So why? And this is just example of 5 to 6 companies. There are many other companies who are on a spree to lay off their employees. So why is this happening? So what this complicated statement meant, let's try to understand in a very simple example. What used to happen in medieval times when the sailors used to sail from their big ships from one continent to another, let's say from the African continent to the American continent, whenever they used to travel and there used to be strong winds or storms in the sea, what used to there would be need to lighten the ship. So they had to reduce the weight of the ship. What they used to do at this point in time was that since they had to reduce the weight of the high sailing ships during the times of the storms, they used to throw their horses out of those ships. And by throwing the horses out of those ships, obviously they had to sacrifice their horses, but by throwing them off into the sea, they were actually reducing the weight of their ships. And this example correctly highlights what is going on into these firms, because these big companies are cutting down on their labor costs because it is getting difficult and costly to function with such a high workforce. This is what is happening with these firms. So let's understand the reasons behind why these big firms are laying off the large number of employees. So first reason is obviously the economic recession that has occurred globally. The economic recession has hit US and other European nations and mostly all other countries around the world, and this has become a major reason why the companies are facing slow growth. And because they're facing slow growth, their budgets are becoming tight, and in order to ease their budgets, what they're doing is they're cutting back on labor costs, which is why the layoffs are being seen in across many companies. Then when we saw in the example of Intel, why even despite US government support for its chip semiconductor industry, even then Intel is laying off its employees, is because there is a drop in demands of laptops and mobile phones and other such electronic devices. So due to again the economic recession is there, growth is slow, that is why the demand also overall is very low. And due to this drop in demand, what is happening happening is that the sale of laptop and mobile phones and other electronic equipment is not that much. That is why the boost for production for these companies is yet to come. So this is also a major sign why the costs are getting tighter and labor costs are being reduced by these companies. Then is a major factor that is being talked about, which also gives us an insight into something deep in the tech industry, is the loss in revenue from selling ad spaces for social platforms. Now, platforms such as Google or Meta, how these platforms earn money is through ad revenue. They use their platform to showcase ads from various brands, various companies all around the world, and these companies pay these platforms, and that's how these platforms earn money. But how do these platforms decide what are those ads best suited for you? For this, they collect your data, the data that, let's suppose I'm using an app from my mobile phone. All the data that my mobile phone is generating can be accessed by these platforms such as Meta and Google. Now, using this data, they can curate the ads that are best possible suited for me. So oftentimes you must have noticed that you might just talked about some TV or any appliance or any kind of product in front of your friend, and within next 5 minutes you just saw an ad on your social media platform. That is happening because these platforms are tracking your data, and the latest Apple security update in this aspect has dented this ad revenue model for these platforms majorly. How so? The Apple security update has introduced an app tracking feature that lets users to opt out of apps that track them. This means that with the help of this new security feature, it would allow the users to decide whether they want that app to track them or not. So when they opt out of the apps that can track them, what this will do is that this will hamper the data collection and analyzing mechanism for the platforms such as Google and Meta, and this has resulted into major loss for them. It is reported that due to this move, Meta has suffered a loss of 12 billion in its ad revenue. So this is also a major impact that has been had on these platforms, and through this news, we also get to see a deeper insight as to how these social media platforms work, how exactly do they earn money, and what are some of the ethical and unethical aspects of it. So these are some of the reasons that we saw, which cumulatively are coming together and resulting into slow growth for these companies. And in order to stay afloat in the market, the first step that these companies are doing is throwing down their horses into the sea or laying off many of their employees from the organizations. So this was a discussion with respect to this article. This is now the application of this issue can be handy in all studying issues from GS3 perspective and other aspects as well. So with this, let's move on to our next article for the day. The next article which appears in the newspaper reads, ISRO's cryogenic engine indigenously developed for LVM-3 passes hot test. Now, this particular article appears in the newspaper because the ISRO, or the Indian Space Research Organization, which is the premier space organization of the country, has successfully conducted the hot test of CE-20 cryogenic engine, which has been indigenously developed for the Launch Vehicle Mark III or LVM-3, which was previously called the GSLV Mark III at Mahendragiri in Tamil Nadu. Mahendragiri is a series of mountain ranges in Tamil Nadu, and there is where the testing facility for ISRO is situated, where they've successfully tested the cryogenic engine. So from this, what becomes important for us from the exam perspective is to understand what exactly is the cryogenic engine, what is the science behind it, what is the technology that makes cryogenic engine, and what is the application that is being brought out over here, especially in the LVM-3 vehicle, which was known as the GSLV Mark III. When we talk about GSLV Mark III, this can be called as the highest, most advanced space launch vehicle for ISRO, and this can carry heavy payloads as high as 40,000 kg payloads can be carried by the GSLV Mark III, where in fact last month itself the GSLV Mark III took out went on its first expedition carrying some private satellites, and this again marked the beginning of growth of the private sector, private space sector for India. So this is a crucial launch vehicle for India, and a new type of engine, that is the cryogenic engine, was tested for it. So let's understand what is this cryogenic engine or technology. Before that, in this new cryogenic engine, the introduction that has happened new in this version is that they have introduced a thrust control valve, which means that how much fuel that would be generated can be controlled in a manner. So the thrust that would be produced from this particular technology would be having a control element. Scientists would be able to control that thrust, and that has added a increased advantage to this engine. So we'll understand what this thrust feature also is. Let's first understand what exactly is the cryogenic engine or cryogenic technology. Now, whenever we mean by cryogeny is the science of studying of those particles or elements in extremely low pressure, low temperature. That is why cryogenic fuels are fuels that require storage at extremely low temperatures, which means extremely cold temperatures, in order to maintain them in a liquid state. These fuels are used in machinery that operates in space. Now, the use of elements which are stored in extremely low temperatures get application in space, that is rocket ships or satellites, because ordinary fuel cannot be used in their in the space due to their very low temperatures often encountered in space, and due to the absence of an environment that supports combustion. So this is a very important aspect that we do understand, and we should understand with respect to fire, is that in order to have combustion, we need the presence of oxygen, and the presence of oxygen is only there on Earth. Whenever we move outside Earth, we would be experiencing absence of oxygen, and that is why combustion as a process becomes difficult, and that is why we need such kind of fuels which are able to perform this process of combustion at extremely low temperatures in the presence of oxygen. So that is why the cryogenic engine or technology comes into place over here, where on Earth oxygen is abundant in the atmosphere, whereas human explorable space is a vacuum where oxygen is virtually non-existent, and therefore cryogenic fuels most often constitute liquefied gases such as liquefied hydrogen, and also there is liquefied oxygen. So now, what are the basic components of this cryogenic engine? So the cryogenic engine or stage is the last stage of space launch vehicles which make the use of cryogenics, which is the study of production and behavior of materials at extremely low temperatures below -150 degrees centigrade, that is to lift and place the heavier objects in space. Now, when we say that it's the last stage of space launch vehicle, so let's understand through this figure. This is the GSLV Mark III, which is newly known as the Launch Vehicle 3. So this is the last stage. When this launch vehicle takes off, we know that the bottom parts keep falling, and the top part has the payloads. So like this particular figure has 14 payloads in this. So this is where is the last stage, and at this last stage the cryogenic engine stage kicks in. So what is contained in this last stage? The cryogenic engine makes use of liquid oxygen, which is known as LOX, and liquid hydrogen, which is known as LH2, as propellants. So essentially, in order to carry out the process of combustion, there are two elements present in this working of this engine: liquid oxygen, which acts as an oxidizer because we need oxygen for combustion, and the fuel that is being generated is from liquid hydrogen. So these two propellants are needed, which liquefy at -83 degrees Celsius and -253 degrees Celsius respectively, and LOX and LH2 are stored in their respective tanks. So they are stored in these kind of combustion chambers, wherein the liquid hydrogen reacts with liquid oxygen and create the fuel. So the cryogenic stage is technically a much more complex system with respect to solid or liquid propellant stored on Earth stages due to the usage of propellants at extremely low temperatures. And a cryogenic engine provides more force. So what exactly is the advantage of this engine? Because it provides more force. So it provides more force with each kilogram of cryogenic propellant uses compared to other propellants such as solid and liquid propellant rocket engines, and is more efficient. So we can see host of advantages over here, where using liquefied oxygen and liquefied hydrogen at extremely low temperatures not just gives us a cleaner fuel which is good for the environment, but it also gives us more force for thrust. And as we saw in the beginning, the new feature that has been added in this new cryogenic engine is that the thrust control valve is also being added, where the amount of thrust that is generated, the scientist would be able to control this thrust as well. So this was a discussion with respect to this article. We took a look at all the important information which was to be there in this particular article. We finish over here, and we'll meet again tomorrow with the important articles from the newspaper. Thank you.